11, which are your 2 feet. So welcome to the City of Joy, Ronya, if I may call you that, right? And you had a first taste of the City of Joy with the book fair yesterday, and of course with the massive traffic jam today. Yeah? It is not very usual to have such traffic jams, but sometimes these things happen. When she came up here, I was telling her that the choice is yours, whether you want to sit on the left side or the right side, because that already would be the beginning of the conversation. And she chose to sit on the left side. So there will be some questions regarding that too. But to introduce you briefly to Ronya Othmann, she is born in 1993, very, very young, has achieved a lot at this young age, lives in Leipzig, a wonderful city in Germany, which was in the erstwhile eastern part of Germany, and now, of course, a very, very bustling kind of culturally active city. Beautiful. And even at this young age, she has been showered with a whole lot of prizes, which you will read in this booklet. I'm not going to read out all of that over here. And we are going to concentrate on her novel, Die Sommer, The Summers, which she wrote in 2020, and for which also she was awarded the Mara Cassens Prize, and a volume of poems under the heading Die Verbrecher, for which she received the Ophel Debut Prize and the Düsseldorf Poetry Debut Prize. So that is a lot of achievement at a very young age. I would like to start by asking you, you see, I went through whatever you have studied at Leipzig and other places too. How is it that you took writing as a profession? Because whatever you studied was something different.
Yeah, I don't know. But I studied at the German Literature Institute, where people in Leipzig were also writers. They teach there, and yeah, so literature is not far away. But before I don't know when I started, but I started maybe like with my sister at the age of like 8, maybe, when we had both diaries. And we wrote about the other person because we knew that the other person will read it. So we wrote diaries, but for an audience, like sibling audience. So and then I started writing and never stopped. So that's
all right. I mean, is that what took you also to journalism? Because you have 2 regular columns now in with the Tageszeitung and also with the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Yeah.
So it somehow by accident, because for the debut novel I started to research also a lot, and then the politics came somehow in the writing, and it was not. Yeah, I was asked to write a report about something, and so I started slowly, but I was not in a journalism school, so it's more an accident.
But I find the titles that you have given your columns also very, very interesting. Yeah. You know, one is called the Orient Express. Yes. Why, is there any background to that? Why is it called the Orient Express? One thinks of Agatha Christie immediately.
Yeah. I wrote the Orient Express. I'm not longer writing, but I wrote with a friend, together with a friend, and it's about German and Middle East politics somehow. And so it was the train to Istanbul, and yeah, and it's.
Yes, of course, because that part of the globe features very much in your novel too. We are coming to that. And the other title also I like very much in the FAZ, which is called Import-Export, because we are living in a world which is only living on imports and exports in a global situation. So why did you call it Import-Export?
Yeah, it's like you can, because it's, I didn't only wanted to write about the Middle East or about Germany, but it's more about the connection and about like the word somehow is connected. So things are not only in an economical way, but also like ideologies, ideas, literature is translated from one language to another. So there is much import-export. Also, yeah, Germany today is a immigrant country, so there's import-export is very like present everywhere. So
A lot of import of immigrants too.
yeah, and
Right.
export also. Yeah,
And export too, right. You see, you have written this essay, which I find very, very intriguing and interesting, Critique and Crisis. Yeah? And there you have referred to a series of crises that the world is facing in the this millennium, starting with the financial crisis in 2008, the refugee crisis in 2015, the corona crisis in 2020, the Ukraine crisis in 2021, and of course, what it does not include in the essay, because it was written before, is also the Gaza Strip crisis in 2023. So, you think that the world is conflict-ridden, which is why this session is also called, the Muse called Strife. So, do you see some kind of a pattern in this kind of recurring crisis, one after the other, in some form or the other?
yeah, I'm observing somehow, because also like in Germany we had now in the last days big protests against the far right, and we have this like switch to the political right globally somehow, and I think there is it's obvious that there now we have very present and very intense crisis, but also like that we have somehow a tool which is critic. It's also a democratic tool, and it's and I think it's maybe a bit of a solution. So that was the essay about, and also because there was much discussion the last year, not only in Germany but also in Germany, about how the critic shrinks somehow, the critic part.
Yeah, because that is very well mentioned here, that criticism overall is shrinking.
Yeah.
And it is probably getting sold out to other factors at the expense of earning money through criticism and things which you have mentioned, that when you're writing online, you don't earn as much per line as you did in print. So that is a space that is disappearing for people who were doing that, not only in Germany, but all over the world. It's the same case here in India too, because newspapers do not have any proper space for cultural activities or for reviewing literature and so on. The space that is given is very, very minimal. And usually, this is also handled by members of the staff and not by experts who used to do it as freelancers before.
Yeah, and it's important to stay independent, because also in the art world there is this like some, because you cannot live from being only an art critic, so they also do commissioned work for galleries, and so then somehow the professions are mixing, and then it's like difficult to be really critical on art when you're also doing commissioned work for.
So it gives you a bread on the one hand, then how can you be critical of it on the other hand? Yeah, right. And then you have also lamented somewhere about the skewed gender ratio when it comes to criticism, that it is mostly a men's domain. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, there was a worldwide, like in the art and literature critic, like it was in Germany, it was called Frauenzählen, counting women. And it was then obvious that there were like the books of the men, they had more space in the newspaper, and men were writing critics on the books of men, and the women had a smaller part, and there were less female critics. So that was it was worldwide.
So the question of quality control, which is also not happening in things which are being written online on these things, is something that you have mentioned also, that there's a lack of quality control. And the world is now more interested in labels and keywords all the time, because you always slot something under some keywords or under some labels, and that is what we are marching towards. It has to be fit into some kind of a slot, right?
Yeah.
You have also quoted somewhere the critic Marcel Reich Ranicki,
Yeah.
a very much dreaded critic in Germany, because I remember his name from the time that Günter Grass had visited Calcutta, and he had written a very, very negative thing about Günter Grass in Germany, and there was a lot of discussion about it. Of course, he says something which is very relevant. He says, freedom and criticism are mutually dependent. There can be no freedom without criticism, and vice versa. Do you believe in that?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
You
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And when it comes to your novel, Die Sommer, there is a particular thing that one notices, because there is Kurdistan, there are the Kurds, then, of course, there's shuttling between Germany and back to that region. Now, many here might be knowing, but some of them may not be knowing about what the problem is between the Yazidis and the IS, Islamic State.
Islamics, yeah.
Because you mentioned that since 2014, there's a continuous genocide that's going on. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
There's a minority in the Middle East, in a Kurdish speaking minority, and my father's family is from this minority, and it's they are living in or lived before in the Kurdish part of Turkey, and in Syria, and in Iraq. And 2014, as you may know, there was the ISIS, the Islamic State. They got in power and conquered like a big part of Iraq. Like I think the part in Iraq and Syria, the country, or they had like a territory which was as big as Great Britain. So the Islamic State controlled over 8 million people, and it's a terrorist group, and it was a really, really brutal rule. And the Yazidis, they're a minority which they have no written holy book, so they're outside. They're in the ideology of the Islamic State. And there are Christians, and they have a written book, and they, even if there are no Jews anymore in Iraq, they have a written book, but the Yazidis have not, and so they are, in their eyes, they are kuffar, like disbelievers. And so they when they conquered big parts of Iraq, they also conquered the region where the Yazidi lived, and they committed a genocide, and it was like killing the men and enslaving the women as sex slaves, it was called. And until now, it's not, the Islamic State is not, they don't have territory anymore, but they're still there, and still many Yazidi women are missing.
You see, when I asked you to choose where you want to sit, you prefer to sit on the left. You have said somewhere that in Kurdistan, there should be neither left nor right, and you want another kind of solution. What do you exactly mean by that?
In which I wrote it in the...
It was probably in the essay over there.
In the essay, and it was like a political...
it says that the solution is not to have a left governance or a right governance. There should be something which stems from the people themselves.
Yeah, it should also be like, because as it is today, I think first it's important to have the human rights somehow recognized, because it's today, it's very difficult, because the Kurds, they are divided in 4 parts, and in Iran, you may read in the news like the revolution against the Iranian regime with Jina Amini, the Kurdish woman who was killed. So we have a very difficult situation, and in Turkey we have the Turkish autocrat Erdogan, and it's also difficult, especially for secular Kurds. So for very religious Kurds, it's okay, but for a secular, it's very difficult. And there's a discrimination. So the Kurdish language, for example, was forbidden for long years, and now they don't learn Kurdish in school. And I think we just need some kind of solution with that. Yeah, in Syria there's the Assad regime, which plays a role in the novel. So in Iraq there was long time Saddam Hussein, and now it's also very fragile with Iranian.
What is the mystery? You were talking about the languages now. What is the mystery of the letter X, the alphabet X?
It was forbidden in Turkey because it's only in the because in the Turkish in the Kurdish alphabet and not in the Turkish. So they forbid the letter X, and also like they changed the at that time when Kurdish language was forbidden, they changed the traffic lights because the when you have the traffic lights, then it's the Kurdish, they are the Kurdish colors. So they changed the colors, and it was and you could come to prison when you were something in the Kurdish colors. It was.
So in that context, the people, the Kurds now, if they want to use Twitter, what do?
No, they're. Now today,
that's called X now.
Yeah, no. Today X is not forbidden anymore. So
today X is not forbidden anymore.
Yeah, but it's other things go. So so they have a because it's getting more autocratic and almost a dictatorship, and they also have a influence in Germany, the Turkish government, and for example they have on Google and Google Play or App Store, they have a app where you can if someone talks bad about President Erdogan, then you can write a notification, and then they will send it to the security. And if people like the police, and if people from Germany or from India or somewhere else go then to Turkey, they get arrested. So
Right.
Digital.
Now, coming to your novel,
Yeah.
I find it fascinating for more reasons than one. On the one hand, I find the language so simple and fluid because it's not difficult at all. I read the German version of your novel, by the way. I don't know how the English translation sounds, but it's very easy reading because every line you read, an image comes in front of you. And in this context, I wanted to ask you, this style of writing, which you have adopted, is it a conscious decision so that you can reach larger number of people? And also the fact that cinema is somehow included in your range of interests now. Like when I go through your novel, I see that it could make a fantastic script for a film, yeah? Everything is so vividly described over there. So is it a very conscious decision to use this kind of a language?
Yeah, when I worked on it, I went over it again and again, and I tried to keep it more like minimalistic somehow. And so it was on purpose, so it was a decision, but it was not like to get a bigger audience more. It's like I think because the topic is it's about war, it's about dictatorship, it's about a family who's somehow divided into different parts of the world, and I wanted to keep the language as simple as possible and as minimalistic as possible.
Right, wonderful. But then this distributed at different parts of the world, that comes through very well because every summer this Laila is going from Germany to this region.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of comparisons also of the kind of way she has been brought up in Germany and the kind of life that she sees back home over there, some of which is probably incomprehensible to her. But as a reader here, I find a lot of these things which you have described there very, very similar to the kind of things that we have in India.
Yeah.
You see, absolutely day-to-day life, the way you have described it, particularly in South India, you will find a lot of similarities of what you have described by way of habits, customs, tradition, and so on. To that extent, is your character, Laila, in any way influenced by some kind of autobiographical thing, your own experience?
Yeah. It's like the village is there's it's she goes to the village of her grandparents, and the village is the same village as my grandparents lived, and but the Layla is not 100% autobiographical, because for me she was some kind of camera. With the camera I could go from one place to another, and she's also very a passive character. She's not she doesn't like she's complaining or is it's like I don't want to do that, or she just does what everyone tells her. So she went in Germany, she's a good German girl, and in her grandparents' village she tries to be a good Kurdish girl. So yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't even protest when people are making fun of her.
Yeah, she
you
doesn't.
See, when
never,
her other cousins or others are making fun of her, she doesn't protest at all.
No, she's a camera, and she's somehow. And then the pressure, of course, when things change, and then she needs to act somehow. Yeah.
Then there is a part where you say that when the father does certain actions while going from Germany to back home, landing at the airport, that he does certain actions like fishing out cigarettes or buying whiskey for the officers over there, which is a very normal thing to bribe them with, right? Then it's like a picture that we have here also, you see? So it's a very, very, very natural thing. So does that still exist in the same manner? Or is that so deep-rooted that it's a very automatic thing that people have to bribe their way through bureaucracy sometimes?
Yeah, but in Syria, it's so... I wasn't there since the war started, so I don't know. I think it's still, or it's even worse. But it's sometimes because Germany is it's an immigrant country, and I know there were sometimes problems because Yazidi or Kurdish people, I know they had in mind that the world is like this, that you have to give some things to the officers to get what you, I don't know, like a stamp that you can stay in Germany, whatever. And in Germany they got problems because they automatically did that, and it's not...
Also during every trip this way, there is a wish list of some people, of the youngsters. Somebody wants this, somebody wants that, of the modern things that are available in Germany. But when it comes to the turn of the grandparents, they don't want anything at all. Do you think that, the older generation of the grandparents and so on are content with whatever they have, that the younger generation now has more and more consumerist needs?
I think that because the grandparents in the Yazidis family, they are like, or my grandparents also, they come from a really, they never went to school or learned how to read or write. They lived on the very, like on the countryside, because they had this discrimination from the majority of the society. So they lived somehow, in the mountains and very, very far away from the cities, and they were used to that life. And they had a garden where they grew everything, and sold things at the market. So they had this kind of life. And then, of course, when television came and the internet, so everything, the world was connected, so the people saw also what is available in another part of the world.
Yeah, that is when television came, but in some parts of the book, I found it fascinating because we used to do the same thing. People who were wanting to listen to the radio had to go to the rooftop because there was better reception over there. This kind of thing existed with us too, and we tried to connect some external antennas over there to get a better reception. Now, what is this thing about sunflower seeds eating? Because that comes at various places very often, you know, eating sunflower seeds. Is it a very common practice?
Yeah, it's and you do that when you are talking for hours with people and you're sitting, drinking tea and eating the sunflower seeds, and it's like when you tell stories, and telling stories is very important in a novel and also in the Yazidi culture because they have no written books, so also the religious life is told orally, and also telling stories. It's very important for the novel because there's in a retrospective. I tell the story, and from the as it starts when the end is already there somehow. So there's one line. It says you can only only tell a story from the end, even if you start with the beginning somehow.
That's right. Yeah.
And telling stories is very important. So there's also all the time the father eating the sunflower seeds and telling stories, and it's also somehow the history changes also how the stories were told, because some things after the Yazidi genocide become more important, which would have not been important at all. For example, I recognized when, like, my family is Yazidi and we went there every year, but they're Kurdish also. So it was before the Yazidi thing was, even because nobody knew in Germany who the Yazidis were. So. And for me, it was not important at all somehow. So for me, other things were much more important. But after ISIS and the genocide, then the details become like who were especially Yazidi, which were especially Yazidi things become more important somehow. So that also changes how I told the story.
Right. Now, among the older generation, in some parts in the book, I've found that even though nowadays, in modern times, I think healthcare has improved in that part of the world also. But the elder people do not seem to take advantage of this healthcare and are in some kind of a denial, always putting away going to a doctor and then finally suffering and either dying or getting into a coma at some place. So is this a very common thing that the elder people still want to live the traditional way and do not want to take the benefits of what modern society is offering?
Yes, but also because they were not used to it somehow, and they always helped themselves. But still, it was also not only. It's not only that it's tradition, but it's also like because in the Yazidi villages they didn't had. In the Kurdish villages in Syria, there was electricity everywhere, but not there. The government didn't build the electricity until there, or they didn't have water from the they had a brunnen fountain.
Yeah, a kind of fountain. Yeah.
So when the Arabic village had this, the Kurdish village didn't get this. So there was a discrimination, and also it was with healthcare. There, until today, there are like less doctors in the Kurdish region. There are less hospitals in the Kurdish. So it's a state. Yeah, it's discriminating somehow some parts of the.
Okay. At another place, I came across something which you described, that grandmother is very religious, but grandfather is not.
Yeah.
Is that very common, that the men folk do not continue the traditions of religion so much as the women?
Yeah, I think so. But there are also very religious men. But yeah, the thing is,
sometimes if something doesn't work, the men, I think, get very angry and say, "I don't believe in God anymore."
Yeah. And but still, it's like there are some parts of the Yazidi that they don't pray because they think someone will pray for them. So
someone will pray for them.
There's a lot of like ambiguity somehow.
Then there is a thing about child marriage, which is like a problem that our country is also facing. That most of these people who are talking or matchmaking that is happening is happening at the age of 13, 12,
Yeah,
13,
yeah.
14, etc., right? Is that still a practice that continues?
Yeah, it's still a practice, and also forced marriage, and it's even still a practice in Germany in the Yazidi community, because there's the biggest Yazidi community outside of Kurdistan region. It's in Germany. So and there is still a problem with forced marriage. Yeah.
And usually, like in our country too, you don't get married to just one person, but you get married to an entire family.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And you have to see to it that you balance your act the way you can.
Yeah.
What is this secret behind this ritual of not cutting the hair of children till they can speak?
Yeah, it's some kind of practice to keep them away from diseases, and
so they believe that, if they leave the hair untouched till they can speak,
yeah, they will
are
get
not touched
ill.
by diseases.
Yeah, no, then and they will get ill. Yeah, this belief, and it's some kind of ritual when the first time the hair is cut. So.
Okay, that's a big ritual here too. Yeah, of course, it's a big
It's
ritual here too.
Interesting.
Okay,
And yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it's, I don't know, but my grandmother always said, yeah, there are some Yazidis in India. And I don't know, because Yazidism, there is some similarity with the Zoroastrian. So she always said, I don't know if but there are some of us in India. So,
okay.
I don't know.
What is the significance of the peacock?
The peacock. It's the holy, like, one angel is the peacock angel, and that's the holiest one. And he's very, he is important also in the in terms of when it comes to like the genocide, because the peacock, there's a thing which is told that the peacock had to knee down to Adam, because there also Adam is also there in Yazidism, and he didn't. He refused.
And he refused. Yeah,
because he said, So he protested. He didn't do it because he only wanted to knee before God, and the Islamist says the Yazidis are devil worshippers because of that. Yeah.
I also love the part where the children play pranks in school with the teacher, and then you talk about this blech canister where they make a noise to disturb the teacher, and the teacher runs away and he's chased out of the village over there. So these kind of pranks are something similar that we have too. But another thing that struck me was this whole habit of hoarding things, buying things and stocking them, and then finally not using them and throwing them away at some point of time, is something I came across in your story over here. Is that a very regular habit? Because I have seen this in my childhood. My mother, I always used to tell her, why are you buying so much rice and stocking so much rice when you don't need it? And after some time, you see, we never, in those days, looked at best before labels. That's a relatively new concept, yeah? But there was a lot of wastage that was gone through. So is it the same there also, this habit of stocking up things for a rainy day?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And there is a point when somebody says that, you see, tomatoes, the way they taste back home, in Germany they taste like water.
Yeah.
So is this comparison made with a lot of other things too, that when you go back home you get genuine stuff, and that in Germany you don't get that kind of genuine stuff?
Yeah, it's because of the sun, and there is much more sun, so they have another taste. And it's, so there, in Germany there are big immigrant communities, and they're all sometimes very homesick, so you try to get some food from, but now much more things are available in Germany. When I was a child, some things, I don't know, in the Turkish, Arabic, Kurdish shops were not available, but now you can get much.
May I now request you to maybe read a paragraph or two from your novel, so that the audience here gets an idea of the kind of writing that you do? I have read it, I found it fascinating, but it's also equally important to kindle the curiosity of the audience over here.
I read the beginning. On the main road, there was a sign with flaking letters that formed the name Tel Khatoun. The sign was cockeyed, perhaps because of the wind. Just a few meters past it, a narrow gravel lane branched off from the main road. It led past garden fences into the village. The village used to have a different name. It had only been called Tel Khatoun since the time when all the other villages and cities in the region had also been given new names. It was just one of many villages between Tibisbi and Ramelan, one that nobody just wandered into, one you only went to if you knew the people who lived there. Layla could walk down the lane to the village in her mind. 10 steps from Tel Khatoun's metal sign to where the lane branched off, then 15 steps to her grandparents' garden, and then between her grandparents' garden and their neighbor's garden, 300 steps on the gravel lane, where most of the time the chickens were already coming toward you, and then past the left side of the fountain to her grandparents' house. Her grandparents' house stood at the entrance to the village, its garden poking in the landscape like a long green tongue. If you walked past the olive trees, orange trees, flower beds, and tobacco plants, as far as the rear wire fence, you could look back to the main road you had come from. All around were fields, and beyond the fields a mountain range rose in the distance, the Turkish border. If Layla had not known what was happening on that border, she might have thought the mountains were beautiful. The house was made from the same clay as the landscape, even having the same color. Admittedly, Layla had only been to the village in the summer. From her father she knew that in springtime the country was covered in green, there were far more plants blooming, and the ground was damp and clumpy. The grass only faded over the course of the summer months and under the hot sun, the heat, the satiety in the earth, and the wind pushing more and more dust before it. Every year, the more the summer advanced, the more desolate the landscape became. Layla had spent entire days lying on the thin foam mats in the house, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling beams were thick tree trunks whose boughs had been cut and their bark shaved off. Above the beams was the vaulted straw, and above the roof was sealed with a layer of clay so that no rain could seep in. The windows were small and deep, the wall thick in order to keep out the summer's heat and the winter cold. There were only the 2 narrow doors. The metal one led to the courtyard and the street, the wooden one to the garden out back. Many years ago, all the village men had gathered to build the house. They had fired bricks out of clay, then hauled and staked them. They worked for 3 days until the house was finished. Chickens lived in a courtyard next to the house, as in all village courtyards. Their droppings lay sprinkled everywhere on the dusty ground. 2 lofts stood there on tall, narrow feet. Those were the summer beds. In winter, they slept on the wool mattresses and rugs inside the house. The house was not large, just 2 rooms and a small corridor. There was no furniture, just pillows on the floor with holes in the covers and thin mattresses. The walls were painted white, but the paint was flaking off, revealing a mixture of clay and straw that had been smeared over the fired bricks. Hanging from the ceiling in the middle of both rooms were large fans that spun incessantly throughout the summer. On the grandparents' property, there were smaller houses, not meant to be lived in. The kitchen and the shower were in one of them, in another the pantry. There was a hut for the chicken, another one for the bees, and in one of the summers, sometimes later on, there was even an outhouse. The village was as flat as the landscape surrounding it. Only in the village center was a hill for the dead. It wasn't really a hill, but more of a small mound. Layla wondered if this hill had been constructed by people, or if the people had chosen it in order to build their village around it, or if they had slowly grown up, swelling from generations of the dead that had been buried there over the course of the centuries. For there were such hills in other villages too. Grandmother calling dying the day you changed your clothes. Layla imagined all the dying people being handed freshly washed clothing made out of coarse material the color of the earth. Her grandmother's phrase about the day you changed your clothes popped into her mind again suddenly as she walked down the empty street. It wasn't raining, but the air was damp. The arrival board at the streetcar stopped 5 minutes. Showed 5 minutes. Besides her, there were only 3 men waiting. One sat at the bench and typed something into his phone. The other was wearing an orange safety vest and holding a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. The third just stood there, smoked, and stared into space. They didn't even turn their heads when Layla joined them. The minutes on the destination board fell from 5 to 4, from 4 to 3, from 3 to 1, from 3 to 2, from 2 to 1. Then the streetcar arrived. Layla put on her backpack again. You always tell a story from its end, she thought, even if you start with the beginning.
Yeah, that gives an idea. As I told you, very, very descriptive. You can imagine how it looks like. And this streetcar arriving and then it dropping from 3 to 2 and 2 to 1 and so on. Is this kind of punctuality maintained in the transport system over there?
Yeah.
It is, more or less.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I noticed that in your book, you read the beginning. Okay. The kind of strife, war, conflict, landmines, and so on, find mention only after 80 pages. Before that, it's all to do with the family, the relationships, and so on. Was this also a conscious thing so that you gave the background of how the people were interconnected to each other and then wanted to talk about the conflicts and the strife?
Yeah, it was, I didn't want to write a political book somehow, but the politics, because if you're in this region and then you're from a minority or a Yazidi family, then the politics, like it comes with violence somehow in the families. And because it was in Syria, there was the spies of the regime and everything. So it was like I wanted to tell how the politics and all this like conflicts from when the war starts like affects family's life somehow and goes to the very private part of their life. So that was so. I wanted to first tell, like also not start with the war, but also start with the small daily things.
Okay. We will now shift to some of your poetry because she has written some wonderful poems, you see. And there's this book called Die Verbrechen, and a lot of poems in it. I went through quite a lot of them. There are long ones, there are short ones too. Like something like Ich habe gesehen is something pretty long, yeah, which goes on for a few pages. But then there are others very, very short. So I would like you to perhaps read the German version and the English version so that the people also get an idea of how it sounds. Of Staatenlos bin ich gekommen, staatenlos bin ich gegangen.
Staatenlos bin ich gekommen, staatenlos bin ich gegangen. Alles hast du gesehen, ohne dass du es beim Namen kennst, ohne dass du lesen kannst, was in Wasserzeichen steht. Die Koordinaten deines Hauses, eine Lochstickerei, ein Papier wie ein Taschentuch. Worauf du dich setzt, wenn du müde bist, deinen Kopf bettest, wenn du schläfst, was du absteckst in diesem Niemandsland, die Strecke, die man dir schuldig ist, das Gilbkraut am Straßenrand, der Gallapfel in deiner Tasche. Du hast nichts verziehen und bist so weit gelaufen, dass du nicht mehr zählen kannst, was hinter dir liegt. Die LKWs in der Wüste, die Soldaten in den Bergen, die Katze auf dem Dach. Einst waren wir dort zusammen, In dieser Stadt zwischen Fluss und Fluss, die Straßen wie ein Knäuel und Fäden, aus Knoten und Fäden, dass du nicht mehr sagen kannst, wen hat man als erstes fortgejagt. So I read the English one.
The English version, yeah.
Stateless I've come, stateless I have gone. You saw everything without knowing it by name, without the ability to read what's written in the watermarks. The coordinate of your house, a broderie anglaise, a paper like a handkerchief. Where you take a seat when you are tired, rest your head when you sleep, that you stake out in this no man's land, the route they owe to you, the dire sweet along the roadside, the oak apple in your bag. You forgave nothing, and you walked so far that you can no longer count what lies behind. The trucks in the desert, the soldiers in the mountains, the cat on the roof. We once were there together in the city between rivers, the streets like a tangle of knots and threads, until you can no longer say who drove out whom first.
All right. Shahana, how much time do we have? Shahana, how much time do we have? 10 minutes? Because we'll take some questions from the audience also. Right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There's this other poem that I came across, which is called Grammatic. Yeah? And that talks about the angst. In this context, I wanted to ask you two things. One is, while writing your poems, you have kind of thrown grammatic to the winds, right? Your entire book of poems is in lowercase.
Yeah.
Even the nouns are not written capital over there, as it should be in German. Why this conscious decision? Why have you put everything in lowercase? Is there any particular reason for doing that? And this poem talks about a kind of inherent angst in human beings, a fear in the modern world. Now, is this a thing that is a continuous thing which we are unable to get rid of? Do you think, is there any solution to get rid of this angst?
I don't know. Maybe if the world changes, then we don't have anymore this angst, this fear. Yeah, but it's not in capital letters because I don't want it. I start. I don't know. I write prose in capital letters and not capital letters. But the poems I started when I wrote poems always to write them in the not capital letters. So there's no hierarchy between the words, and somehow a like full stop or a comma is not really a. It's not really like the sentences are not that much separated. So somehow.
Before we take a few questions from the audience, where do you think Germany is going today?
Yeah, Germany is immigrant country since like there were some kind of thing which was called guest workers, but it's a strange word. But they call
when the Turks started going way back in the 60s and so on and so forth, they were all called Gastarbeiter.
Gastarbeiter is the term they call it. So workers came, and after the Second World War II, also like the wealth Germany has today is also because of all these workers who came there and worked. And I think in some parts in Germany they're used that it's like a multicultural country now. So it's not really German. So there are people from everywhere, and they're now German somehow. So they define the German not in an. I think it's important not to define Germany in a nationalist way somehow, because it's diverse, Germany today. So, but there is also the problem we have everywhere with the far right, which goes stronger and stronger. And there, we have this Flüchtlings, this refugee, they call it refugee crisis. I don't like the word crisis because the crisis is the war, because of the war the people come, but the refugees are not the crisis. So
Refugees don't create the crisis.
yeah, so they are like a symptom of the crisis. So that's I don't like the word refugee crisis, but it's called refugees crisis now. They call it, and they were like anti-refugees. The far right in Germany. It's also one of their main, and of course homophobic, anti-women right, everything, but mainly also anti-refugees. And that's, I think, now it's interesting, or I hope it will not go further to this far right part. But even if they are not in power, they're like in the parliament, the far right, but they're not in power yet. Even though there is harm, because the ruling parties, they are afraid of the far right, so also they change some kind of the things like the Abschiebe, like to send the refugees back, and this politic doesn't. It's by now the ruling party, so there is a harm until still.
Yeah, but there's kind of a rise of the far right. Don't you think this is a global phenomenon at the moment?
Yeah, that's really. I think everyone is.
Democracy on paper is kept, an apparent democracy.
Yeah, of course.
But it is something else in the name of democracy in many places, which we see, right?
Yeah. But real democracy, so not and for that we need the critic.
Do you see a nexus between corporates and this tendency of the far right coming and making people consumerists, even with artificial intelligence going to play a much bigger role in our lives now? Do you think that, all this helps these forces to establish a kind of hegemony?
Yeah, but I think it's I see a connection, but in some things, also with the corporates, like in Germany, the economy is afraid of the far right because because like the Germany is a wealthy country. It's also because it's somehow open and people get the import-export there is important somehow. But so they like the corporates, they are afraid of the far right now. But I think it's not everywhere the same.
All right. It was fascinating talking to you about your novel, about your poems, and about your essay, and about your views on certain subjects, global and otherwise. We will now take a few questions from the audience, and strangely enough, it's a coincidence that they are also all sitting far right here, as far as we can see from here. No, from your perspective, from our perspective, you're sitting far right. So any questions? Yes, you have a microphone. Go ahead.
Hi, Ronya, this is Aditya. I'm a digital media producer and publisher, and I publish a little bit on current affairs, right? So I guess the conflict that is there in the Middle East...
Can you give your name also?
Aditya.
Okay.
Yeah, Adya Basu. So the conflict that is there in the Middle East is more or less a conflict between NATO and Russia and Iran lobbies happening in Middle East. So they are not fighting it out in Europe. They are fighting it out in the Middle East, right? So as far as I remember regarding the Kurds, the initial conflict started with Saddam Hussein because they wanted a place called Kurdistan, right? And later on, so I think ISIS came into play and captured a lot of the portion that were held by Kurds at that time. So right now, the Kurds are actually fighting for Kurdistan, or they are actually fighting for survival. And thing is, you have mentioned a lot of Kurd women being taken, but you have not mentioned how the Kurdish women have formed like a fighting army and how they have actually gone and liberated areas and rescued the girls. So if you
women units, I was also with the Peshmerga women unit at the front line, and they were like on the front, like after now ISIS is but still there, but not anymore. They don't have a territory, but now there are the Iranian-backed militias, and still the women there on the. Sometimes there's also they fight with the Kurds. So, and the women there are on the front line. So, and there were like women in my younger than me, like they went to war when they were 18, or in some units even younger, and they were like, so I met, for example, a singer, a Yazidi singer. She became a general, and she was like, she was, before the genocide, she was, yes, she made music, and then when the genocide happened, it was also wish to like defend themselves because it was on surviving, and yeah, they also some of the women who were in captivity, they went out and then they joined the units. So they were, yeah.
Okay.
But we have a tradition in women fighting, so it's not because it's a bit funny because in Germany they have like sometimes the image of the Middle East. Yeah, the women are like, there is like really big discrimination of women, but still they're like women fighters. And in Germany it was not allowed for the women to go to the army, to the Bundeswehr for a long time. But in Kurdistan region we have a long tradition.
It was probably a necessity also, you know,
yeah.
which is why they went to fight on the thing. Yeah, any other questions? No? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Satyajit. I just wanted to ask a question. So yesterday there was a session about how sometimes fiction is used as a medium to kind of voice criticism due to the limitation recently of the printing press and things like that. So as an author in Germany, do you feel that the same is true? Do you see fiction kind of being used as the kind of medium? And do you think that is kind of getting traction with the wider audience? So I just want to get some thoughts from you.
Yeah, I think we have like, I think the press freedom is still is very good in Germany, so we can. It's not the question that you don't get problems from like a governmental part or somewhere, but if you write some things, you could get problems from people who don't like what you write, so they're aggressive.
So do you get trolled?
Yeah,
if you write
of course,
something?
yeah, in threads, and it's like for us who work we are used to it somehow. When you write something, then or also write about, I wrote about the Turkish Erdogan and like the Islamists also, and then of course they write. And also when I write about the far right, they write nice messages. But yeah, I think we are in a very comfortable situation that we only have this threat, not from a government side.
So would you agree with the gentleman that fiction provides an avenue for you to air your thoughts? For which you don't have space?
Yeah. It also to write about taboos. It was somehow, there are some taboos in the novel, which for me it's I can always say, okay, it's a novel, so that is somehow you are somehow safer, but still I portrayed the Syrian author Khalid Khalifa, who is now not living anymore, sadly, but he told me one story when there was in Syria, the government, they read every book which was written, the government or the regime read it, and he wrote about the 19th century, and then he thought, okay, maybe this time they will allow it to be published here, but then they said, no, we all know you wrote about the 19th century, but you actually wrote about today, so sometimes it doesn't...
That is there. You wrote about 19th century, but actually you're writing about today. No, you talked about taboos, but then along with taboos, I came across in your novel of also some ignorance, you know. Yeah. There's one point where one of the women says, oh, if you take a pill, does it not make you barren for the rest of your life? You can't have children anymore. That's what I thought. So if I knew that I could still bear children, I would have also used protection or pills and so on. So a lot of ignorance is there in that kind of section of people also, right?
Thank you.
So one last question for anybody who wants? No? Oh, yes.
You're not a politician, but a writer, but it's a little political question. So as you are there in the ground there and among the Kurds and all, I know about the Iran faction and the US and NATO faction. Are you seeing any presence or interest from Saudi Arabia and China, separately speaking, in the region?
Yeah, there are some mosques, I think in the Kurdistan region, which are it's the religion is often a tool of extremism somehow. That's very sad because there was, and sorry, they finance some mosques, but China, I think, is also, but it's not obvious. Like the real obvious thing is when I went to Baghdad and from Baghdad to Mosul, it was like you had the feelings you didn't entered Iraq, you entered Iran, because there were the pictures of the revolution guards from the Iranian militia as a military. So you didn't saw Iraqi military pictures. Sometimes you just saw Iranian. So that was very, and it's also like Iraq lost control. Like the Iraqi government, they don't control some parts because they are controlled by the militias. So it's really, and when you go from one place to another, you have you're not there. There's, for example, I was in Sinjar, and I met a policeman who was paid by the Iraqi government, and his son was his son disappeared. He knew where the son was because they forced him to fight. He knew who was responsible, and he was a policeman, but he had no power, and he's just there and acting to be a policeman, and is paid by the Iraqi government, but the Iraqi government has no power. It was totally controlled by militias. So that's the reality somehow. It's and if something happens to you, so the government cannot do anything. So it's really militia controlled, and it's sometimes also I thought it's very scary. So because when the policeman cannot even do anything when his son.
Oh, it's the same thing we are facing on a day-to-day basis over here, where the police is sometimes totally helpless, you see, in certain situations. So thank you very much for this conversation, which has been an eye-opener in many senses and also thrown a lot of light on the kind of feelings that you nurture about the modern world and about the strife-ridden world, and hence justifying the title of the Muse called Strife. So big hand to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you.